Hello everybody. If you're watching this video right now, it means we've gone to a full distance learning model, but not to worry, the PowerPoint presentations continue. So for homework over the weekend, you guys read a little bit about George Washington's presidency and a number of precedents or examples that he set for future presidents. Now, one of the most important precedents that he set was the establishment of a cabinet. And basically, we've talked about this in Unit 2, but a cabinet is a group of advisors to the president, each of them having different responsibilities in terms of the running of the country. So in George Washington's original cabinet, the two most famous members were Thomas Jefferson, who was the Secretary of State, and he was basically responsible for our foreign policy, right? How we were going to deal with other countries at the time. And Alexander Hamilton, who was in charge of the Treasury Department as the Secretary of the Treasury. So he was in charge of how the nation's finances or the nation's money would be handled. And I asked you, were there any specific plans or issues that they disagreed on? And the answer is yes, pretty much all of them. And these disagreements are highlighted in the musical Hamilton during the two cabinet battles, and yes, we will be watching Hamilton in this unit. And they led to the emergence of the first two political parties. So what I want you guys to do is, using the note taker that's posted in Classroom for today, you guys are going to fill that in with the following information. First, define political parties. And I'll give you a few seconds to write this down. I would also advise pausing the video. Okay, so hopefully you paused the video, wrote down the definition of a political party and the names of the first two political parties. Basically, a political party is just a group of people. Now those groups are extraordinarily large, right? Like hundreds of millions of people. But a group of people who have similar opinions on how the country should be ran. Generally, they agree on most issues when it comes to the United States, and their job as a political party is to get people elected to help see their policies through. All right, and they want to work together to get people elected to the highest levels of government, including the presidency, so they can see the country run the way that they think it should be run. Now, originally, the disagreements between Thomas Jefferson and Alexander Hamilton in George Washington's cabinet would lead to the creation of the first two American political parties. Those are the Federalist Parties and the Democratic Republican Parties. And from here on out, I'll probably just refer to the Democratic Republican Party as the Republican Party. Okay, and we'll talk about how those two split apart and changed as time went on and farther in future units. Okay, what I want you to do right now is pause the video and take down notes in the note catcher on the differences between the two original political parties. Okay, hopefully you guys paused the video and wrote down some of the differences between the Federalists and Democratic Republicans. I'm going to talk through these a little bit, and then at the end of class, if you have any questions, we're going to meet again, or I'm going to ask you to rejoin the meet for the last few minutes of class, and if you have any questions, I'll go over them then. So first thing we want to point out, the two leaders of each party, right? The Federalists were led by Alexander Hamilton, the Democratic Republicans by Thomas Jefferson, and also James Madison, who would become our fourth president, and we're going to take a real in-depth look at those two men later on once they become president in this unit. Now, one of the major differences between the two are the people who considered themselves members of each party. Okay. Now, the Federalists, for the most part, were wealthier people, business owners, people like that. The Democratic Republicans were mostly people with less money, people who were farmers, people who didn't live in like urban areas like cities like Boston or New York City or anything like that. And they had opposing viewpoints on a lot of the issues going on with the United States, the young United States, and had differences of opinion on what kind of country we should be. So the Federalists, they preferred to have a strong national government. Okay, meaning they wanted the U.S. government to have a lot of power over the states. In opposition to that, the Democratic Republicans, they thought the states should maintain most of the power. Remember, this is a huge thing at the beginning of the United States, right? The beginning of our country's history. We just came from a system where all the power was concentrated in one person, like the King of England. Then we tried out the Articles of Confederation, where the United States government really didn't have much power at all. All the power laid in the hands of the states. Remember, the Articles of Confederation had all these flaws, like different currencies, right? Different forms of money in every state. The federal government, the national government, didn't have the power to tax, and therefore we couldn't have a unified army, for example. So we're trying to strike a balance with the Constitution as to whether we're going to have a strong national government, a strong state government, or somewhere in between. All right. And the Democratic Republicans are on one side of that. The Federalists are on another side of that. Now, some more concrete examples of things that they disagreed on. Number one, financials or economics of the country. So Alexander Hamilton basically said, as a young country, we're going to need to establish, right, credit. Now, the way credit works, right, credit is basically the same thing as credit is today, right? It's like your trustworthiness to be lent money, right? If I lend you money, if you have good credit, that means that you're pretty trustworthy. People can expect that you're going to pay that back, okay? If you want an example of okay, I'll give you my example. When I was 18 years old, I went to college and I took out student loans. I went to UConn. And I'd say I don't even know how much in student loans I took out, somewhere around $100,000 in student loans. And I pay those back in student loan payments every month. I'm actually still paying off my student loans. But the fact that I always pay them back and I pay them on time, right, shows that I have pretty good credit, right? It's pretty likely that if I ever need to borrow money again, they look at my credit history, right, and they say, oh, well, he always pays this loan that he got in 2006, he always pays it back on time in his monthly payments. When I was 23, I had to buy a car, right? So I got a car loan, and I paid that back each month. And by paying that back, showing that I'm able to pay back a $10,000 loan, when I turned 24 and I wanted to buy my first house, they looked at, oh, well, he has a couple things. He has, number one, his student loans that he's paid back every month and his car payment. All right. And we think that he should have pretty good credit, right? We think if we lend him the money for a home, it's very likely that he'll be able to pay that money back, right? And as you get older, you're going to have bigger and bigger purchases, okay? Your first home might not be that expensive, but maybe your second home that you need to buy needs to be a little bigger because you have kids. So when I bought my second home here in Newington, they looked at my credit and said, okay, we have his student loans, he's been paying those back on time. We have his car loan that he paid back on time. And then we have his previous mortgage payments from his old house, right, that show that, okay, it's very likely that if we loan him this large sum of money, he's going to be able to pay it back. That's how you establish credit. And countries are no different. Okay, especially a young country at this time like the United States, Alexander Hamilton felt we needed to establish some sort of credit internationally in order to be taken seriously. Okay, so early on, he says, what are some ways that we can try and establish debt? Like, what are some ways that we can basically have some sort of loan payment that we can show that we're able to pay back over time? So in the future, when we need to make a big, when we need to have credit, we need to make a big purchase like funding a war potentially. Other countries are going to look at our credit and say, yeah, we'll loan them money for their war because they've always paid back all of their debts. And what Alexander Hamilton proposed was that the national government, the United States government, take up all the debts of the individual states that they incurred during the Revolutionary War. So basically, Massachusetts took out a loan from other countries like France to help fight the Revolutionary War. Virginia took out a loan, right? South Carolina took out a loan. That's the way we did it in the Revolutionary War. So each country still owed, each state still owed a different amount of money from the war. And Alexander Hamilton says, well, why don't we just adopt all of the states' debts that they owe to other countries like France from the Revolutionary War? And we'll pay those back as the United States government through a national bank. Right? And that'll give us international credit. So in the future, if we ever need to fight another war, other countries will look at these payments and say, oh, they're very likely to pay us back if we loan them money. Now, this sounds like a great idea, right? And a lot of people, especially the Federalists, said, yeah, this really is a great idea. It's genius. However, some people had a problem with it, like Thomas Jefferson. And he had a very rational argument. And this is actually one of the arguments in the cabinet battles from the Hamilton musical. He says, why should Virginia, a state that already paid off all of their debts, why should they have to incur the debts of the other states that haven't paid it off yet? Right? So it's basically like pooling all the debts together. Right? And he says, Virginia already paid back their loan. Right? We don't owe any more money as a state. Why should we have to help pay off the debts of Massachusetts by incurring it nationally? So that was his argument. All right. Also, tariffs. I don't know if you know what those are. Tariffs are a tax on international goods. So stuff coming in, like being imported from other countries. Alexander Hamilton wanted to stimulate the American economy, right, especially our industry, by making foreign products more expensive. So people would have to buy American. Right? And business owners in America like that, right? That's why they supported the Federalists. Business owners are like, yeah, tax all the stuff coming in from other countries, because that means people will be more likely to buy our stuff. It'll look cheaper, right? Or more affordable. Whereas the Democratic Republicans are like, we're not business owners. We're just regular people. Why should we not be able to have cheap stuff come in from overseas and be able to buy it, right? Why are you intentionally making that more expensive for the average person? Right. So that's kind of how they disagreed on the economics. And then the other big foreign policy issue was whether we were going to support the British or the French. Remember, the British and the French are constantly at war. The French helped us win the Revolutionary War because they just hate Britain, right? They've been at war forever, since way before the French and Indian War, right? Like 100 years straight, back and forth. And sometimes it stops and then continues again, right? But we wanted to see, who is our friend going to be now? Are we going to be close with the French, or are we going to be close with the British? And the situation was very complicated because the French are fighting a revolution of their own, okay, for a lot of the same principles that we fought for. During the French Revolution, they're trying to overthrow their king and queen, okay, and establish a republic like we have. Now, their revolution got really violent. This is where like the guillotine gets invented, the machine that chops people's heads off and things like that. There was a period of time called the Reign of Terror where they were doing public guillotining like every single day and making big spectacles out of it. It became really, really bloody, and it kind of became controversial as to whether or not we were going to support them. People like Thomas Jefferson and the Democratic Republicans had a very simple argument. Right? They said the French helped us, and we promised that when the time came, we were going to help them, and we should be a country that keeps our promises. Right? They're fighting for a lot of the same beliefs that we have. Right? They want to have a democratic system of government like we have. Right? They helped us when we needed help. We should go and help them. Alexander Hamilton and the Federalists didn't want to support them. Right? They thought the French Revolution was something to remain out of. We're a very young country. We're not ready to go jumping into another country's war. We need to worry about things at home first, right? And we need to mostly worry about building up our economy. And a better way to build up our economy, in his opinion, was to reestablish a relationship with the British, because they had a very strong economy. So if we became trade partners with them, it would help us out, even though we just fought a war against them. So people kind of took one side or the other on these issues, and a lot of people ended up joining one of these two political parties. Now, what I want you to do for the last few minutes, I want you to answer the exit slip question. If you were alive in the 1790s, which political party do you think you'd belong to? And you can explain why using details from what I just talked about and what we talked about today. If you want more information or a more in-depth look at some of the things that occurred during Washington's presidency and the rise of political parties, I advise you to go to the stream and classroom and check it out. There are 2 good videos in there. One of them's from Crash Course where he goes into a little bit more detail. And the other one's kind of like what we just talked about, and they do a compare and contrast of the 2 political parties. And you can use those if you want to help answer your exit slip question. All right. I'll see you guys in a little bit. I want everybody to rejoin the meet for the last couple minutes of class, and I'll tell you that when we meet. All right. Thank you, guys.